All right, in this lecture, we're going to talk about the types of elections in Texas, starting with primary elections. So since the early 20th century, early 1900s, Texas and many states have converted to something called the primary. Now, primary is when the people in the major parties, and major is defined by any party that received at least 20% of the vote for governor. The word is gubernatorial. I want to see that in your essays. Gubernatorial. 20% of the gubernatorial vote in the prior election. Who does that translate to? In Texas, that's Democrats and Republicans. Anybody else, so if you're Green Party, you're Libertarian Party, you can use a convention. So you go to your convention, you say, Tom, you're running, and Tom says, great. And then Tom can be on the ballot if they're a libertarian. So Democrats and Republicans are the only parties, the only ones that meet this criteria, and they are the ones that vote, that hold primaries. So they actually put all the people that are running for whatever office. It can be sheriff, it can be state senator, it can be state house of representatives, it can be Supreme Court justice. all of it is elected, and all of them have partisan elections. So you're going to have a Democratic primary and a Republican primary. Now in Texas, our primaries are open, meaning that you do not have to you do not have to decide which party's primary you're going to vote in until you get to the polls. We don't have registration in Texas. So you hear people say, I'm a registered Republican. Well, not in Texas, because the only way that you are registered technically is if you voted in the Republican primary. So you literally get to the polls and they ask you which ballot do you want. And usually they have a precinct convention. They didn't even have a precinct convention this year. But you tell them you want the Republican ballot, and then you vote in the Republican. You wrote in the Republican primary, or you tell them that you want a Democratic ballot, and you get the Democratic primary. These are run by the parties and financed through county, and then the parties get reimbursed from the state treasurer. That is how they are financed. And so poll workers are hired. Poll workers are paid. If I'm not mistaken, they're paid like $11 an hour, and they sit in there. We usually have early voting place on South Campus, and they have one on Southeast Campus pretty regularly. They have them usually have a polling place at UTA, and so people go and vote. Now the difference between a general election and primaries is that you have to win your office by a majority. And majority just simply means 50% plus one person. So if no person, say there's 5 people running for county sheriff on the Republican primary. If nobody gets 50% plus one, gets a majority, then they're going to take the top 2 candidates and have them run again until somebody gets a majority of the votes. In the Democratic Party this year for U.S. Senator, there were three candidates, MJ Hager, um, Ralph West, and I don't remember who the third person was. And MJ Hager had more votes but did not have a majority. So she and Royce West had a runoff. Now, usually you think voter turnout is low for primaries, you think voter turnout is low in midterms. The lowest voter turnout you're going to ever see is in a runoff. That is in some random time, a couple of months after the primary election. People do not turn up for runoff elections. They just don't. If a person decides that they are going to run for an office, they have to pay the fee, and it varies by what office you're running for. So if you're running for U.S. Senator, the filing fee is $5,000, but if you're running for Justice of the Peace or Constable, it is, depending on the county, between $375 and $1,000. State Board of Education members, the filing fee is $300. District judge, between $1,500 and $2,500. Now, I have a friend that ran for and won district judge in Dallas, and she didn't pay the fee. She got signatures and on a ballot, and if you get enough signatures on a ballot, you can get the fee waived. I remember her going through that process, and I'm stuck over here in Tarrant County, so I couldn't help much. Remember, I was talking about an open primary. An open primary is where you don't have to register early to vote in a certain party's primary. You just tell them when you get there. There are some places where they actually you have to register. I remember in 2016, a couple of President Trump's children had not registered as Republicans, and so they were not able to vote in New York because they hadn't registered as Republicans at some time much earlier. That's a closed primary. Only people that have registered are going to be able to vote in that party's primary. When we have open primary, that kind of lends itself to people wanting to affect the other party's nominees. So either the nominees in your party are boring, or you want somebody not so desirable to win from the other party. Those are two reasons that you would decide to go and vote in a party's primary that you have no real affinity for, or really that you are not registered for or not part of their party. That is called crossover voting. When you vote in the primary of the party that you are not affiliated with to affect the outcome. In a general election, you only have to win by a plurality. So you, after the primary, and I liken it to homecoming. When I was coming up, we would have one nominee from each class for homecoming queen, and then there would be a general election where everybody in the whole school would vote, and that would determine who the homecoming queen was going to be. So primaries is like getting a nomination from your class. If that's a pretty good example. So primary elections are always in March, unless something crazy is going on and there's lawsuits going on. We have had primary elections as late as June behind lawsuits. The runoff elections are usually in May, and general elections are in November. The first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And there was this big long explanation for why it is that specific. I don't know. It has something to do with harvest and planting and November 1st. I don't know. But and people having to come in from the country from church uh, and not wanting to come in on the Sunday, so they would vote on Tuesday. I don't know. I got nothing. Anyway, um, there are several levels of administration um, in the county. You have a county chair for both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Um, and they are in charge of administrating elections and making the rules. There are several choices for the ballot. You can have one that says these are all the Democrats that are running for whatever office. That is called a party column ballot. You can also have an office block ballot that says these are all the people that are running for senator: the Democrat, the Republican, the Libertarian, the Green Party. So they'll have, and that is much more likely what you will see on a ballot. In Texas, we are going that now. The parties would love to have party column where you can just go and say, okay, I pick all the Democrats. Up until the last election cycle, we had something called straight ticket voting. Where you could literally walk in and say, I just want to vote for the Republicans. I'm not going to look at all these names. I'm not going to look at all these people that are running for all these district courts and all these county courts and JP and all these people that are running for Supreme Court and Court of Criminal Appeals and all these senators and members of the House of Representatives. All I want is, if there is a Republican by their name, cast my vote for them. So literally you could be finished voting in 2 seconds. It was eliminated and Democrats were devastated. Democrats fought that tooth and nail. What is much more likely to happen is that people go in, they vote for the people that they know, regardless of what party they're in, and then vote primarily for people from the party that they are affiliated with. Now that's called split ticket voting. If you vote for some Democrats, some Republicans, some Libertarians, then that's called split ticket voting. So I told you that parties really would prefer to have all the people from one party, whatever office they're running from, together. That is not the way that we do it. It is sometimes difficult to get on the ballot. Of course, if you're a Democrat or Republican, you get on the ballot by winning your primary. If you are from a third party, so you're not Libertarian, we let Libertarians on the ballot regardless in Texas. But if you're not one of the major parties or the party that's given an exception, then you have to actually get a petition signed to be able to get your candidate on the ballot. And you have to get between 1% and 5% of the number of people that voted in the last gubernatorial election, and the people whose names are on the ballot have to be registered voters. They have to be eligible and registered, and they cannot have participated in any other party's activities. They couldn't have gone to a convention. They certainly couldn't have voted in another party's anything. So it makes it very difficult for third parties to get on the ballot. our write-in process is even difficult because you can't just have people, you cannot win. Let's say it this way. You cannot win an election as a write-in candidate unless you file ahead of time. So you will see usually a separate piece of paper or sometimes, and now they're really doing it electronically, and it'll say, do you want to vote for one of the following write-in candidates? But you have to actually go through a process to get your name on as an eligible write-in candidate. So you can write Daffy Duck on the ballot, but Daffy Duck can't win unless Daffy Duck went and filed to get their name on the ballot as an official write-in candidate. This is pretty unique to the state of Texas. I have not done an exhaustive search of other states, but Texas just makes it really difficult for someone other than the two major parties or a libertarian to get on the ballot. One of the progressive changes that was made in the early, like the 1920s, 1930s, was that we vote by secret ballot. So you have to have a private place where you go and vote. Literally, y'all, they used to take ballots to people's houses and like vote, and we'll just take your ballot in. Uh, and after Voting Rights Act restrictions, Texas and many other states are required to have ballots in English and Spanish. In Harris County, they had a lawsuit, and they also have to have ballots in Chinese, I think two dialects of Chinese, and Vietnamese. Now, I noticed in the last election, in the midterm election, that Tarrant County had ballots in Vietnamese. They had voter registration cards in Vietnamese, and they had ballots in Vietnamese. So you could choose that. I was not aware of why or how they made that change. I'm not sure if there was Texas legislation or if Tarrant County just decided to make that change. I'm not sure. So, hot topic. For years in Texas, we voted on these little papers with this pen, and you would put the pen on a special board, and you would go and you would poke through a little hole by the name of the person that you wanted to vote for. In the 2000 elections, we had all kinds of issues where I know the state of Florida was invalidating ballots because the holes weren't poked all the way through. The piece of paper was still there. So they were saying that they couldn't tell who you meant to vote for, and they were invalidating ballots because the holes weren't poked all the way through. It was some dirty trick stuff. But for the first time, we heard that the little piece of paper is called a Chad, and they were invalidating ballots because of hanging Chads. So then everybody made this big move to go electronic. So people, counties, and and secretaries of state who are in charge of voting in every state went to the effort to find new voting machines. So for years, I know in Tarrant County, we had this little wheel. You would turn the wheel and then you would push the button when you got to what you wanted to do. This in the primary, Tarrant County has some even newer voting machines. And then the only issue about electronic voting is if you have some type of malfunction and if they are in any way connected to the internet or the World Wide Web, there is always the potential for hacking. And there has been a little bit of evidence that there were a couple of counties in Texas where someone actually hacked into systems. So you got to find the perfect electronic system that is not connected to the internet so that it cannot be hacked. We also found out that there were some issues with several counties in Florida where some nefarious actors were trying to get into the system. At any rate, once we have had all the nominees from all the classes and we know who the Democratic nominees are, we know who the Republican nominees are, we know who the Libertarian nominees are, then it is time to get ready for the general election. So you start seeing ads, you start making appeals to certain groups, you start choosing issues, you look at your party's platform and you decide what are going to be the big things, what are going to be your themes, how are you going to show yourself, are you going to spend time? I have seen some nasty ads about a lady, I think she's in Dallas County, who was mayor of Irving, and they're saying she was mayor of Irving when the Cowboys left Irving, and she has a tendency to help only the rich. And she's running for Congress. She's running for U.S. Congress. Now, studies have basically said that negative campaigning doesn't necessarily turn you toward the other candidate. What it does is depresses voting. So people are like, I just don't want to mess with this at all. And so what negative campaigning does is keeps people from turning out. So you're not necessarily going to get their votes if you are the one that's behind negative campaigning. And since there have been some big changes in elections laws, candidates don't have to run the negative campaigns anymore. They have PACs, political action committees, that are groups of people that usually stand for a certain issue that raise money and advertise for political candidates. So political action committees are usually associated with special interest groups. So like a union couldn't donate money, but their political action committee could. So you basically tell the people in your group, donate money to this political action committee. That political action committee can run ads, they can pick candidates, they can actually donate money to candidates. We have a real big issue in Texas, where our reporting is really, really tough. And it is tough to source where the money came from. Soft money is money that is spent on behalf of a political party, on behalf of a political candidate. And so it is not necessarily vote for this. Well, it is to turn out more voting. So you'll see stuff like vote blue or I don't know that I can give you another example. So what we'll do then, instead of me giving you examples, is just look at some of the mega donors in Texas. These are millions, and it looks like the highest is the National Association of Realtors. That's a typo. Realtors. Real estate industry, supporting property rights and supporting low property taxes. National Association of Realtors. Followed by, the highest is the Texas Association of Realtors. Texans for Lawsuit Reform. They're trying to limit lawsuits against businesses and professionals like doctors. AT&T, Empower Texans, HEB, Foundation, I'm assuming. Associated General Contractors, Energy Future Holdings are some of the highest donors. So, campaign finance regulations are designed to hold public officials and campaign contributors accountable by having them report how much they are donating and having candidates report how much they receive. This is controlled by the Texas Ethics Commission. Um, and okay, Texas Ethics Commission receives the reports. They publish the reports. They have the ability to sue civilly or to even file criminal charges if there are violations. But I promise you, you will not see a lot of Texas Ethics Commission's lawsuits. They just, they're a really good reporting agency. They are not very good police. And for reasons that we will discover in chapter 7, it's just really difficult to tell Texas politicians that they can't accept money. It's just difficult. Who gets elected? We'll look at demographics in chapter 7 as well, and some in when we get to local politics. But in the United States and in Texas, candidates are typically Anglo males. We have seen huge rises, especially in 2018. We're seeing more and more women candidates run. We are seeing more and more minority candidates run. And they are making gains. There are some places, most of the women, not all, most of the minorities, not all, run as Democrats. And so Democrats are starting to see more and more success, especially coming out of urban areas. If you remember our blue-red map, and Republican women that are running as Republicans, really saw a lot of success in 2016, 2014, and 2016. You started seeing Republican women really doing well, at least in our state. It costs a lot of money to run. Campaigns are expensive. Campaign ads are expensive. Usually you have to hire consultants and you have to do a lot of traveling. And so the amount that it costs to run for office can get really, really high. So that may account for some of the reason, because you have to be an attractive candidate to be able to attract the money to be able to run, or you have to be independently wealthy. And who wants to spend all their own money on a campaign? Not very many people. Maybe Ross Perot. So that concludes chapter 4, voting and elections.